Now, hold on one sec, Matt, and I think we're ready to go now. Thank you very much. Welcome to the State of the Blockchain call. Let me hand it over to you, Matt.
Great, thanks, Giannis. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everybody. I'll try to be extra brief so we can open it up for some discussion and questions at the end. And if nothing else, I approach this, and Sean and I both approach this from the standpoint of it being an evolving story. No one has all the answers to anything, and we're still trying to unpack some of the mystery over a decade later on exactly where this stuff is going and how it's affecting what we do in our industry. But beyond that, I think the propensity for it to impact everything on the planet, not just digital, but I think just the concepts of finance and how we connect as human beings. So really great stuff wrapped up in this story. I will start by saying that I'm not in any part of the US that is under 3 or 4 feet of snow, although I am in Florida and we're dealing with close to freezing temperatures, and we don't know what to do with ourselves when it gets that cold in Florida. So, and Giannis, I think you got some pretty decent weather when you were here, so we were happy to order that up for you. But right now we're dealing with a lot of cold. So I'm going to do a bit of reshuffling of the deck chairs today. In the previous presentation, Sean Moore, our CTO, did most of the heavy lifting. We've worked on this together for the last almost the last year. We've been working on stuff related to rolling into blockchain and crypto and what we're offering as a company to support customers. And we developed the assets and sort of the research for this deck together. But he did a lot of the delivery last time. He was going to do it this morning, but called me earlier today and said he wasn't feeling well. So I'm going to take you through this. You'll have to settle for me. But I think, the key concepts are things we're familiar with. We're all hearing about blockchain, crypto, NFTs, the metaverse. And what's cool for us as a company is being headquartered in Florida, having 2 offices here, having a satellite office in Warsaw, Poland, beginning to sort of build our global strategy, gives us unique insight into what's happening around the world, but also on the forefront as a lot of skunk works, a lot of innovation is happening here in the state of Florida. And at the same time, we know that in the US, there's different regulatory dynamics at play. In fact, it's a little bit like the Wild West in most places of the world, but there's almost no playbook at all in terms of how crypto will unfold from a regulatory perspective. But we're beginning to see the signs of that. So just to keep us on track, and so you know who I am, my name is Matt. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at Solodev. Been with the company for about 5 years, but working with Sean for almost 2 decades. I spent most of my career working in and around Silicon Valley. I worked at the divisional level with IBM Global Technology Services. I was part of the Microsoft Office 365 launch back in the day. It's probably why I was having so many problems with Teams this morning. It's my Microsoft pedigree. I'm also a fanatical Mac and Apple user of products, so I have that dichotomy working against me as well. In the process of working with big companies, I realized that I love working with startups and growth stage companies, and the big part of that for me is the storytelling piece, and I think that's what attracted me to how we deliver those stories and the whole field of content. And for most of our existence at Solodev, as some of you know, we've been in the CMS community. We do have a content management platform. We carved a niche for ourselves around being a CMS that's purpose built for Amazon Web Services. We were very early to the game with AWS, so we engineered a lot of our practices around the cloud from a fundamental level. And that put us into an evolutionary position when it came to infrastructure. So in the years that followed, probably about 2015 on, we really transformed over time into more of an infrastructure and cloud services company, as we call ourselves today. So now our CMS is just one of many products we have in our ecosystem, but we're much more focused, I think, now on the development of infrastructure services and how our customers can build custom apps in the cloud, and that plays directly into what we're going to talk about today. And along the way, had a lot of great opportunities to partner with Amazon, get behind the scenes in Seattle with their AI team, and start to get the early playbook on serverless. So over the last 6 months to a year or so, we've been working on big serverless projects for customers. The one I'm most proud of is recently we launched the first ever serverless infrastructure for the Special Olympics and their USA Games that will be held next June. It's going to power their fan engagement app and their ecosystem. It's going to run tens of thousands of concurrent users at the same time, and they're going to do it all at a fraction of the cost. And that's key because serverless is actually a big part of how we see blockchain and crypto really evolving in the marketplace. So keep that serverless piece in mind, because it again plays directly into what we're going to talk about. So enough about me and about Sean, who leave it to your own imagination as he's not here today. And with any great story, it's always fun to start with a mystery. And I think that's what's interesting about this whole field, is that there's a lot of mystery shrouding how a lot of this fundamentally was set up. And while we have bits and pieces of it, I think it's interesting from a primer perspective to go back and dig into that, because there are little telltale signs about where we ended up today, and ultimately some questions about where that will lead us in the future. I'm not going to talk a lot about what blockchain is. I think we all understand the fundamentals. Instead, we're going to talk more about the origins and what we found in our research. And I think there are two key dates to keep in mind when we talk about the blockchain, when we talk about the proliferation of cryptocurrencies. And the first one is August 18th, 2008, when we saw the first uneventful founding of Bitcoin.org. We didn't have the fanfare that we would have today with the launch of some of these new big platforms, as we see with like a crypto.com. But it really wasn't until October of 2008 that a lot of this was made very clear to us in terms of how it would function and what it meant to the marketplace. And that was crystallized by that Bitcoin peer-to-peer electronic cash system white paper, which was authored by someone named Satoshi Nakamoto. This was a new and unknown name in tech and fintech. And while the vision that was sort of cast in this white paper was a bold one, there wasn't really an application for it yet. We hadn't seen it in practice. But it did foretell of this concept of having decentralized financial networks, ledgers on separate networks that created a way for us to transact using public and private keys, and tokenizing the ownership of things around this concept of what he was calling a Bitcoin. The first cryptocurrency that really required this concept of a mining methodology. Again, I think we all know how that ended up working over the following years, and that there was a finite amount of this stuff to mine, which created some of the parameters around how Bitcoin would function. But the fundamentals were all being prognosticated in this first paper, and this idea of having electronic cash. Now, in this white paper was a framework for how Bitcoin would as a network would function. But it wasn't until the following year, in January of 2009, that the real example of this would be felt. And it was when Nakamoto himself mined what's now referred to as the Genesis block of Bitcoin, which is famously set to 0. And ironically, at the same time that all of this is happening, we're in the middle, as we all remember, we're experiencing a global financial meltdown, for lack of a better term, with the heads of banks and institutions declaring never before seen bailouts for banks. And that's really key, because there was a dichotomy in the way that large institutions, our trusted financial institutions and governments were beginning to reveal how they were going to solve this problem, how they were going to create a safety net, while at the same time, this concept of decentralizing was really the antithesis of what they were doing to stave off a Great Recession. So there's some coincidental things happening at the same time historically that kind of inform us about where the thinking was. That big government, big control, big third-party entity that's kind of controlling the way that centralized finance works. Meanwhile, tech is thinking about how to decentralize it. But who exactly is Satoshi Nakamoto? And that's part of that big mystery. And this goes back even further than many of us realize. And while it's accepted that the belief is accepted that it's a pseudonym, we do have a few potential candidates who may individually or perhaps even together have authored the white paper and built the network. So if we go back to the mid-90s, there was someone named Nick Szabo who invented this virtual currency concept called BitGold. And while smart contracts as a concept were first proposed earlier than that, it was Nick's concept of BitGold in '98 that really took the concept of smart contracts and started to fuse it together with a way of potentially transacting. Then it was again in 2009 that Hal Finney, right around that time that Bitcoin was proving itself out transactionally, he downloaded the Bitcoin software the day it was released, received 10 Bitcoins from Nakamoto, and completed that first transaction. So is Hal Finney Satoshi Nakamoto? Was he responsible for sort of dog fooding his own creation? And then fast forward to 2010, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. But the 10,000, now famous 10,000 Bitcoins mined and utilized to purchase 2 famous pizzas from Papa John's from a pizza restaurant in Florida. So again, Florida at the center of the story, right in our backyard, but playing a really big role in how this unfolded. And then suddenly, in July of 2010, Nakamoto disappears. And again, there wasn't a lot of seeding of this. There wasn't a lot of that. We couldn't read the writing on the wall on how any of this would play out. It was happening very quickly, and it was happening, with not the same level of fanfare that we experience today, where we would expect these types of news points to be front and center. These were of interest, but they weren't the prevailing news of the day. If we look at that space from 2010 to 2015, which I think to some extent is sort of rewriting what Web 2 is. And as we now know, Web 3 is being rewritten almost completely around the concept of the influence of blockchain and cryptocurrency and how it's evolved and changed everything. But Web 2 at that time sort of rolled, I think, between that 5-year period from 2010 to 2015. And it's largely accepted now that I think many of these data points of transformation where companies began to embrace the emergence of the blockchain and cryptocurrency as the real signals that this was a pivotal time period for the evolution of this market-changing technology. And again, if we look at 2010, one of the first big stories was this, as we now refer to it, Bitcoin Pizza Day transaction. And it was on May 22nd. Someone named Laszlo Heinz agreed to pay 10,000 of his Bitcoins to have 2 Papa John's pizzas delivered. And we love this story. I think it's captivating because we're talking about something that's relatable to everyone, particularly in the e-commerce range. But while Papa John's didn't technically accept the Bitcoin, it was some transaction with a third party who really did pay maybe $25 for pizzas to Papa John's. The point of the story is that there was this elevation for retailers around the idea that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency could be used as a channel for being able to purchase within an ecosystem. And famously, the comparison now is that had he paid for that those pizzas in not today's dollars, but maybe back up to its peak of about 63,000 for 1 Bitcoin, those 2 pizzas would be worth about $630 million, right? So a really big sea change in terms of the value of where it started to where it ended up just a short period of time ago. Obviously, it slipped from there, but that peak is really telling.
So Matt, I'm just conscious that we have about 5 minutes.
All right.
Left.
A little behind schedule. Thanks to teams. But I think retailers started seeing what was happening, and that those signals indicated that there was potential in the marketplace to build those channels. And that's when we started to see the proliferation of BitPay. Later in 2012, WordPress embracing Bitcoin as a currency, Overstock then accepting Bitcoin around 2013. And the big stop in all of this was when Mt. Gox had that now famous hack where about 850,000 coins were stolen. Now, to be clear, it wasn't the blockchain itself that was hacked, it was the wallet that they had produced. So a lot of the security issues became front and center. And as the story continued to unfold, this is really what led to Vitalik Buterin and Charles Hoskins working on the Ethereum project. Again, starting with a white paper, starting with a concept, focusing on how to build those transactions safer and in a more flexible way. And of course, where we see that kind of end up from 2015 to 2016 on is the rise of the exchanges. And there are key
Matt,
concepts.
perhaps given that we have 5 minutes left, would you mind if we could just jump to a couple of slides and just like open up for Q&A, perhaps even? I know you have an ecosystem slide that I think was really impressive when we met in Florida. Is that like 1 or 2 slides forward, if you don't mind? Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
I think just shows, you know, how much is going on in the industry.
Yeah, this is where we ended up, you know, in that post-Ethereum time period is, you know, now the proliferation of the exchanges, all these different layers in the stack sort of building into the infrastructure, you know, and how we're able to, you know, deliver through wallets, right? And now security becoming a really key part of that, which again, kind of is built on this idea that we're going to need to become more serverless, scalable, and secure as we build out the core components and the technologies. But you can see that just even in the last couple of years, this ecosystem has just ballooned to the point where we're now seeing, you know, thousands of coins in the marketplace, and all these different technologies beginning to emerge as players.
One thing that struck me when I was in the US was Matt Damon, which I think everybody here from Europe knows who is, but perhaps not so many here has seen that there's like advertisements regular on TV in the US with Fortune favors the bold, right? Something like that.
Yeah. I'm going to jump to that one, but you know, really quickly, I think that period after from 15 to 2021 is where we saw Ethereum really explode, and now this is where the governance and the regulatory landscape is trying to respond to a lot of that. And I guess if there's a god in this universe, it's Elon Musk, right? I mean, another celebrity, and I think much more well known to folks on the other side of the pond. You know, he speaks about something even in a subtle way, and it changes the market dynamics. You know, we see a rise and fall and a shift in things. But you know, to your point earlier, Giannis, I mean, we see a lot of these components like having great websites, having a great experience, having a content experience is one of the key elements in a lot of these coins, which have now entered the market very rapidly in being able to build out their infrastructure. You know, they have really smart, really well put together systems for being able to transact. And a lot of this came from the gaming community, right? There are now over 1 million users on Axie Infinity, and they're all transacting every single day, every minute of every day. And this is where, you know, the whole NFT part of the story has begun to explode as you know, these digital assets become part of the trading. And as you mentioned, Matt Damon, this is sort of the real signal that it's now been adopted as a real player in the market, is that they're hiring celebrities to be shepherds and ambassadors for the brand and the message. And you know, who doesn't trust Matt Damon? He's been to Mars, right? He's been to Mars in the movie. So I'll wrap up by saying that you know, there's a lot of, I think, as NFTs become, you know, the sort of the talk of the day. You know, and what's led us here is the high utility applications of the blockchain. So a lot of this stuff would not be feasible or accessible without having the infrastructure and the components and the tools that we just looked at to be able to build out these types of solutions. The big challenge now, as crypto becomes much more accepted, is how do we reduce the gas fees, the cost and expense of being able to transact. And then finally, the rise of the metaverse. You know, we see, you know, Facebook and GameStop, Walmart, other big brands globally that are embracing the concept of the metaverse. You know, proof of stake is becoming the way that more of these coin ecosystems and exchanges are building out their experience to make it less expensive and more secure. And again, we see these ecosystems just exploding. You know, thousands of new players coming into the fold. You know, lots of different technologies in the stack. And I'll end by saying that, you know, we still don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. We still don't know who sort of led to the rise of all of this. You know, is it one of these players? You know, what does this tell us about where and who is shaping the future of the market? And it might be this guy. We don't know. It could be Elon Musk that's all along has been dog fooding this himself. I mean, the timing could be right in the late 90s. So, but I'll wrap it there and leave it open for questions. And Giannis, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for taking us through the slide deck. I hope it's okay with you that I'll get a copy of the slides, and then I'll try perhaps to work closer with you than I do for some of our other calls to flesh this into a blog post so that we can really get the state of the blockchain as it is here in the beginning of 2022. Thank you very much, Matt, for jumping in on this. On behalf of Sean. Any questions, comments, reflections from anybody else here at the end of the time? Matt's details was also on the slide, as in the past. I'll share this with everybody, and let's continue the conversation on this. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Matt.
Yep. Open for any questions if anyone wants to reach out, and good luck. It's